I'm here to tell you that everything that you have learned about how to hook students is wrong. Now here's the thing, as teachers we are always striving to engage our students, and one of the most satisfying things that we can do both for ourselves as teachers and for them as students is to make things interesting. And one of the most fundamental tools we have to do that is what we call the lesson hook. But I have to be honest with you, most of what is labeled as a hook these days is not a hook at all. Instead it's just like work that the students do when the bell rings. Do a journal entry, look at this picture, whatever. And look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do those things because they're actually very helpful, but they are in no way a hook. Now I happen to be a fisherman, and when I hook a fish, all of a sudden there are stakes involved. Like I have to get the fish in without losing it, and the fish is all the while fighting to get free. And that's what's missing with a lot of what passes for a hook these days. Namely, there are no stakes. And if there are no stakes, my students will have no emotional involvement in the outcome. And so in this video, I want to give you a little of what I've learned for how to get real emotional involvement from my students in any given lesson. Now, the main goal with any hook is this: create tension. And really, we're just borrowing storytelling tools here. Like any good story creates tension, and the stakes for the character are high. So when I'm putting together a lesson, the thing that I'm thinking about throughout all of my preparation is this: how can I create tension? Because a human being, no matter if they're 50 years old or 15 years old, cannot handle unresolved tension, and I want to use that to my advantage. Now, there are a million manifestations for how a teacher can create tension, but let me share with you a few examples from my classroom. And look, maybe these won't work for anybody else, but they've worked for me. First, a go-to method for me is to start with misconceptions. This, of course, has to precede a lesson in which the students think they already know something about it, like the American Revolution or World War II. So, for example, when I do a lesson on the separatists who showed up to Massachusetts Bay, I start by asking the students why they came to the Americas. And you know what they're going to say: religious freedom. So I write that on the board very big, and then I put a big X through it, and I say, no, that is not why they came. And all of a sudden, I've just created tension in their minds. Like, what do you mean? That's what I've always been taught. And then in the lesson, we discover that these folks had all the religious freedom they could ever want when they moved to Holland, but they were in dire straits economically, and so they really came here to better themselves economically. Now, I just gave you my whole lesson in like 2 sentences, and I know it's more complicated than that, but you get the idea. Starting with misconceptions is a key to building tension. It doesn't have to be complicated, it can be very simple like that. Second, and related, if I think there's a good chance I already know their misconceptions, then I'll start with the phrase, everything you know about X is wrong. In fact, that's how I started this video, if you remember. Like, maybe that offended you, or maybe that made you nervous, but whatever it made you, I have one word for it: tension. Like, it's a very bold statement to say something like that, and if that did offend you, then you're like, oh, he doesn't know me, he doesn't know what I know. Or if it made you scared, like, oh, I don't want to be wrong, like, oh, I gotta listen. Whatever it is, that's emotional connection, that's emotional involvement, and that's what I want. And if our students experience that kind of emotional involvement in something, they want to be told what's right. Okay, third, I've created tension by asking them to do the opposite skill or activity that I want to teach them. For a period of about 5 years, I did this both for my A-Push and AP World classes on the first day of school. I got them into groups of 3 or 4 and told them they had 10 minutes to write a brief history of America or the world. Like, just tell me what you know. And even if you've never done this, I bet you know exactly what they gave me after 10 minutes. The A-Push students gave me a list that typically goes something like this: Pilgrims, American Revolution, slavery, Constitution, Civil War, etc. AP World students gave me a similar outcome: ancient Egypt, hieroglyphics, and they don't know anything else till the Protestant Reformation, Industrial Revolution, World War I, Nazis, etc. And at that point, they're actually feeling pretty good about themselves because they remembered all those events. But then I take the papers and I put them in the trash and I say, that is not history. And in the years I did this, you could hear a pin drop. Like, what do you mean that's not history? Like, who is this guy throwing away our papers in front of us? Tension. Then I spend the class explaining that what they did was not history. What they did was make a list of events. And maybe that's how you've learned history before this class, but that is not what we're going to be doing in here. We are going to be learning how to think historically, and those events that you listed are the raw material of that process, but you need to get that understanding of history out of your heads now, because that's not what this class is about. And they're like, what is it? And right into their confusion, I start teaching them about historical thinking. A fourth way is to use their need for achievement to teach them. I don't even have to tell you how exhausting it is to be a teacher today. Hey teacher, I got an 89 in the last test and I want to know, how do I not fail again? It's ridiculous, but regardless, you have to be careful here because they're already under a lot of stress, but you can use that to create tension. So on the day that I plan to teach them how to support arguments with evidence, I also scheduled a quiz, and I told them generally what was going to be on it, but I made it really hard. And so I ran the sheets after they were done, and what I hoped would happen happened. Everyone failed, and badly. And you know what happened next. Like, the chorus of complaints rose to a fever pitch. Like, that was too hard. That was not fair. We weren't prepared for that. And so I told them, look, I am an eminently reasonable man. I'm not here to ruin your academic careers, but if you don't want this in my gradebook, then you're going to have to appeal to my reason. Get together with 3 other people and make the best argument you can for why I should not count this grade. And do you know what they did? They got to work. And at the end of 5 minutes or so, they each presented their arguments for why I should not count the grade. And some of them even held up the page that I gave them explaining what would be on the quiz and showed me here how what I wrote was not the nature of the quiz. And I'm just taking it all in at this point. I'm just giddy, like, oh! And once I've heard all their arguments, I tell them, you have convinced me. And then I tell them that I was never going to count it anyway. And that's when they get indignant. What? Like, you put us through all this, you weren't going to count it? Nope, that quiz was fundamentally unfair. And then I show them what they just did. They made solid arguments and used evidence to support it. So look, you already know how to do it. So let's apply that skill to history. Now, to be fair, this was well into the year and I had a good deal of rapport with the students before I tried something like this, but you know what? They never forgot it. And whenever they were struggling with their historical arguments, I got to tell them, remember, you already know how to do this. Like, think about what you did with that quiz and then do that here. And a lot of them said that really helped. So I could go on enumerating examples, but you get the idea. The best hook is the one that creates meaningful tension in my students. If I do that right, then their senses will be on full alert for me to resolve it with the lesson, and that is exactly where I want them. Okay, I hope that helps you in your classroom, and if you have good ways to hook students, leave them in the comments below so that we can learn from each other. If you want me to keep making these videos, then you can let me know that by subscribing. Heimler out.